Hi, everybody. My name is Allison Birchgold-Lorenz, and I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you about your topical modules and give you a little bit of starter advice. If you're anything like me, you know what you're doing, but it's nice to set aside a little time just to get prepared and figure out what you're going to do before you dive in. So this is some starter advice that I have for exploring your topical module data and results. So actually, I would first recommend when you start thinking about what you're going to do with your data is going back to why you chose that topical module in the first place. Now, maybe it wasn't your choice, but a discussion in your office or at your institution in some way. But putting yourself back in the mindset of why you picked that set of items or why that set of items was important to your institution can be really useful for figuring out what to do when now that you have the data and results. If you're a little fuzzy on what your goals were, you might want to check out a little tutorial that we've had about what institutions do to decide which topical module to choose. And I'll have some links to all the resources that I mentioned on the last slide of this presentation. But it might be good to just take a look at that and think about different ways that you could use it or different ways other people have used it. And just give you some approaches for your audience and the kinds of questions you might want to ask. That does bring me to your audience. Thinking a little bit ahead of time about how familiar they're going to be with NSSE in general, and how maybe the topical module results that you're exploring fit within that topical module, um, or fit within kind of the larger scheme of what you plan to do with your results. I'll move my video there for y'all. Um, but you might want to also think about kind of how statistically or number savvy your audience is going to be, so you know how complicated to make or to not make the results that you're present. Are they a pretty traditional audience, or would they like to see a little more critical approach to what you're looking at? What kind of questions or critiques might they have ahead of time that you can kind of get in front of? We also have a tool called our campus-wide mapping device or tool, where you're able to see kind of suggestions for how we map the different items, both on the core survey, but also in the topical modules to different offices and units and task forces. And again, I'll include that link towards the end. Another thing that you might want to think about before you dig in is your data quality. So unfortunately, I sometimes hear from clients, oh, well, we had a small response rate, so we couldn't use that data. And I disagree. I think all data is useful. You just have to put it in some different contexts. Please don't throw any of your data in the trash ever, even if it's a small response rate. I mean, there are things that you can look at, the demographics, you know, how representative of is it of your entire institution or of certain subgroups at your institution, and make note of limitations, particularly small groups or small groups that you maybe didn't really hear much from or you heard way over proportionally from. Take note of those things, but that doesn't mean the data is garbage. It's just the context you have to put in front of the story that you tell. A lot of times people think about quantitative data as something they need to be able to generalize or predict. And maybe instead of doing that, we're just telling the story from some of the students who decided to give us some feedback. So take a little gentler approach before you throw everything out. It's good to think of some questions ahead of time before you start digging around. So I've listed 3 different types of questions that NSSE data is really good at answering. So what is the frequency of something? So how often are students doing something, or how much do they perceive something? Those are good questions to ask. How to relate two things to one another. So how does participating in some engaging activity relate to sense of belonging? Or how do their perceptions of something relate to graduation rates? Now, we don't have graduation in our data files, but that's certainly something that you can merge in because we do include identifiable information for you to make that kind of match. It's another great question to look at subgroups of students. So how does some phenomenon, participation, or perception relate to different student characteristics or social demographics? Looking at things by major is always helpful and useful, I think, in different analyses. And next, kind of gather everything that you're going to need to be able to do your analysis. So we hope that all of the items that we ask are actually helpful, but we don't expect you to, in any analysis, use everything that we provide with you. It's a lot. I would suggest starting small and chipping away and starting with things that are most important. So feel free to be choosy. Pick a few items just to start if you'd like. Identify ahead of time things from the topical module and maybe from the core. There might be some additional things that you want to add that could be useful. We do have a lot of items on the core that do cover content in our topical modules. It's just pretty broad because we know the topical module will get in more in depth. And also think about other institution data that you have. I mentioned graduation rates earlier, but there's plenty of other information you have about your students that could be useful in your analysis. So get a hold of that. Then I would suggest taking inventory of what we have to offer you in these analyses. So we do provide several reports if you want to get a sense of what you're looking at. We have sample reports on our website, but everything you should be able to find on the institution interface, or send us an email, we'll help you find it. But I would definitely look for your administration summary report. That gives you some basic data quality information. I would look at your respondent profile. That's going to give you information about who responded. Look at your topical module frequencies and statistical comparisons report. This is a report we specifically provide to you to help you get started with your topical module results. And then we have your data file, and that's where you can really start to dig in and get answers to your questions. So returning back to those three types of questions that I brought up before, the first time, what is the frequency or how often are students doing something? Your report is actually a great place to start with that. That's where we put that kind of information for you to quickly find and use. These other questions, probably a little better for your data file, for you to answer those sorts of things. And so we'll talk about what it looks like to use both of those resources. And I'm going to be specifically using our career and workforce preparation topical module. So let's pretend for a moment, indulge me, that we're at Nesseville State University and Nesseville has this new initiative to build connections between their students and the local communities who might employ them after they graduate. So because we have this initiative, we wanted to look at this topical module to get some information and see how we're doing. So questions we might ask. How often have the students learned about a career or industry from practicing professionals in their courses at Nesseville State University? And how does this learning relate to how they feel what they're learning is relevant to their future careers? And then finally, are all of our students in different majors learning about careers and industries from practicing professionals in their courses? If we have this new initiative, I hope so, but let's look at the data and see what we find. So the first thing that I'll do is start with what we have in our report. So we have this item, and I'm specifically looking at seniors. We always divide the results we provide by first years and seniors because their contexts are very different. The first thing I'm going to look at is this particular item, learning about a career or industry from practicing professionals, and how often are students doing that. So I look at my results and I can see 65% or so of NSU seniors are frequently, and that's very often, learning about a career or industry from professionals in their courses. So 65%. Is that good? Is that not good? And that would probably depend on what our goals were with this new initiative that we launched. If we wanted all students to have this experience, then maybe we have room to improve. If we wanted at least half of our students to have this experience, then yeah, we did great. We can also see in the statistical comparisons that on average, our students are doing this a little bit more than their peers. And the difference is significant, but it is pretty small, and it's important to keep in mind. I would say, though, a lot of people jump right to that statistical comparison and they think, oh, we've got an up arrow, we're doing great, and they move on. But I would encourage you still to look at your institution's results all by itself, that 65%, and ask yourself, is that okay? You might be doing better than your peers, but are you still doing okay for what you wanted for your goals? So both pieces of information I think are important. If you do get a result, though, that you're a little disappointed in, say you expected these results to be much higher given this new initiative that we started, you might want to think about doing a FESI administration. So FESI is our parallel faculty survey, the faculty survey of student engagement. And this survey can actually give you very interesting information of what's happening in classrooms from the faculty perspective. And there could be differences. Faculty might say they're doing this. Very frequently, students don't realize that it's happening, or, the differences in perceptions can help you figure out what's going on and add context to your student results. So just a suggestion. After that, we might want to turn to our data file, and here's where things get a little detailed. I did want to give you some heads up about getting into your NSSE data file, because frequently what people want to do is replicate their report results. And sometimes they end up having trouble because there are things that we do that they're not necessarily aware of. So do keep in mind a few variables. So we have a sample variable, an eligible variable, and IR class. Those three variables are what we use to select on to create your reports. Sample ensures that they're randomly sampled students or census students. Eligible institutions have the opportunity to mark students ineligible after an administration starts, so we take those ineligible students out. And we use institution reported class for our reports. So make sure you're using those three variables appropriately when you start your analysis. We also weight our reports by weight 1 in your data file. And I would recommend that if you're going to stay at institution level averages. If you are going to dig into subgroups, though, then I would recommend not using weight 1. Our weights are intended for an entire institution, not subgroups of the institution. So keep that in mind. Also, in our career workforce prep module, there are a few things to keep in mind. We do have some items that are not applicable, have one of the response options is not applicable. And we have two different versions then of the variable, a version where that not applicable is coded as missing, or a version that's coded as an actual result, coded as 9. But you want frequencies on the one where it's a coded response if you want to see how many people wrote not applicable. But if you're wanting to do an average, you definitely don't want that 9 in there. So you're going to want to use the other version of the variable. We also have some variables that just might be helpful, easy kind of recodes. So we have some items that are, have you done, plan to do, oh, I have a typo there, I'll fix that. Do not plan to do or haven't decided. And we've collapsed that down into a done, not done sort of situation. So if you're looking at those items, that might be useful too. And again, don't forget, we do include student ID so that you can map your institution collected information to this if it's helpful for you in your analyses in some way. Let me give you a couple more examples of what I looked at for Nesseville State. So when we wanted to see how learning from practicing professionals relate to how much they feel their learning is relevant to their career plans, we see a really pretty strong relationship. Tried to keep this simple. I didn't want it to be too statsy for my audience, but you see the dark part of the bars is the percentage of students saying they frequently are learning from professionals in their courses. And we see a very strong collection or connection between those students and tending to say very much or quite a bit, some, that their learning at this institution is relevant to their career plans. And that's a great thing to see. So if there are questions on whether or not this new initiative is working or is it, doing things that we intended, this is definitely an outcome that we want to see. And hopefully we can strengthen that more and shrink the number of people who are saying they're infrequently learning from professionals in the field. Our last question was about whether or not this kind of learning was happening across all different majors, which, as I know, in speaking to a lot of faculty and institutions, faculty like to see what it looks like for their students, not the entire institution. So it's always good to split by major or school or field or however you group your different students in their different majors. But here we see that it's not the same in every major. Definitely in education, health professions, social service professions tend to be the places where you're doing more kind of internship, practicum kind of training things. So that makes some sense. But if we want to increase this for all of our students, we might look to the harder sciences, physical sciences, biological sciences, engineering. There's absolutely no reason that professionals in the field couldn't be adding some information to these courses. So it's a good place for us to start if we're wanting to increase our numbers. So these are just some really quick examples of how you can get started using your topical module data and using any NSSE or FSE topical module data. Here are some of the resources that I mentioned. I'll quick go over again. We gave some guidance on how to choose a topical module, so you might want to revisit that. If you're not totally sure or want to think through what your reasons were for choosing that module, we have our campus item mapping tool where you can go and see how some of our items map to different functional areas on campus. We have a bunch of our sample reports so you can get an idea of what to look for in your downloads from the institution interface. And then I included a link to FSE. If you do want to do our companion faculty survey, you can find that information there. Hopefully, some of this helps kind of center your mind a little bit to get you started and digging in. But definitely let us know if you want more help, a closer consultation, more complicated analyses, questions you're not sure of how to approach. We would love to help you make the best use of your topical module data and results.